Look at this frozen glacial lake. It sits at a dizzying 4,800 meters up in the Indian Himalayas, surrounded by a steep, snow-covered cirque. In 1942, an Indian forest official trudged up to this isolated spot, known as Roopkund, and found something entirely out of place. Scattered across the ice and stacked along the shoreline were the remains of hundreds of people. The frigid, high-altitude environment had preserved human skulls and bone fragments for centuries. By 2004, forensic analysis offered a clear explanation. Researchers concluded that these bones belonged to a group of 9th-century Indian pilgrims on an arduous 12-year foot journey. According to the injuries found on the skulls, the pilgrims and their local porters had been caught out in the open and killed by a freak shower of giant hail. This scientific theory mirrored local folklore. For generations, stories had circulated about an angry mountain goddess who hurled stones down at irreverent travelers, freezing them in place. The alignment of forensic evidence and mythology gave the public a satisfying narrative. The gravesite was treated as a solved case, an enchanting curiosity rather than a forensic mystery. That solved status had immediate consequences. By 2009, India's booming IT sector had created a new class of young professionals with disposable income, and affordable online booking companies followed. Driven by social media, thousands of hikers flocked to the Roopkund Trail. The 50-kilometer journey was grueling. Trekkers spent a week hiking through steep valleys and fragile alpine pastures called buyals, ultimately arriving at this rugged landscape. To reach the lake, they had to navigate a knife-edge ridge known as genetically, where one wrong step meant a fall into the icy basin. The volume of foot traffic devastated the ecologically fragile area, eventually forcing a government ban on camping. Worse, tourists treated the archaeological site like a playground, rearranging the bones for photographs or taking skulls home as souvenirs. Our eagerness to interact with a conquered mystery inadvertently compromised it. We were disturbing the crime scene right before the tools needed to truly understand it or even invent it. In the early 2010s, ancient human genome sequencing gave researchers a way to study history through biology. Scientists could now dissolve bone dust from centuries-old remains to isolate and read the exact genetic makeup of the victims. This sequencing data comes from an ambitious 2019 study. To verify the pilgrim theory, researchers took 38 powdered samples from the Roopkund remains and sent them to 16 different labs worldwide for comprehensive genomic analysis. This timeline graph plots the origin dates of the victims, and it reveals that the bones were not left by a single doomed expedition. The bodies arrived in multiple, distinct waves, some separated by a full 1,000 years. The 2004 consensus evaporated overnight. In its place stood a chaotic timeline of separate, unrelated deaths. This map isolates the first genetic group, South Asians deposited between the 7th and 10th centuries. But panning west, a second group died in the 19th century, with DNA matching the island of Crete. Finally, a third 19th century individual's genetics originated in Southeast Asia. Because these findings were so unexpected, the team ran a dietary analysis on the bones. The chemistry of what these people ate during their lifetimes matched the distinct geographic origins indicated by their DNA. Reevaluating the physical evidence only deepens the confusion. Out of the hundreds of bodies scattered around the lake, barely 6 or 7 skulls exhibit the trauma signatures of a hailstorm. The hailstorm narrative is inadequate. It accounts for a tiny fraction of the deaths, leaving the presence of these global travelers completely unexplained. We are left with a glaring historical riddle. Looking at these sunny Mediterranean valleys, there is zero historical text to explain what a large group of 19th century travelers from warm, low-altitude climates was doing in the deadly extremes of the Himalayas. Without the hail theory, we have to consider the environment itself as the primary suspect. These individuals could have slipped from the Junagali Ridge, succumbed to extreme cold, or died from acute mountain sickness, a constant threat at this altitude. It is statistically improbable that multiple unrelated groups would be killed by freak weather at the exact same coordinates, centuries apart. The lethal landscape is the only common denominator. For reasons we don't understand, disconnected cultures across the globe were drawn into the same geographic trap. Finding accurate answers in the future will be difficult. The site remains unpreserved, and years of trekkers moving skeletons have compromised the physical context of the remains. It is a bitter irony. Just as science developed the molecular tools required to decode the lake's past, decades of human interference erased the physical context needed to verify these findings. We analyzed just 38 samples out of hundreds, and it was enough to completely rewrite a millennium of history. It forces us to ask what other impossible truths are still buried in that ice. We rushed to solve Roopkund. In doing so, we ensured the true identities of these travelers, and the reasons they perished will remain an enduring mystery.